Okay, we're going to start where we left off on Friday with chapter 2. The last thing that we were talking about was seafood toxins. Let's go back. So the seafood toxins, again, that's something that is microscopic. You can't see them, smell them, or taste them. They cannot be destroyed by freezing or cooking. They can be naturally occurring within the fish. They can occur when certain pathogens are present. And then they can go up the food chain. Fish that have eaten smaller fish that have eaten the toxin, it becomes concentrated in the larger fish. For shellfish, it is shellfish that have eaten algae that are toxic. Okay, so there's a list of toxins. I think we might have gone over this. Histamine, ciguatoxin, saxitoxin, brevetoxin, and domoic acid. So there's a screen for each one. Histamine causes scombroid poisoning, commonly linked to tuna, bonito, mackerel, and mahi-mahi. Very unusual symptoms: reddening of the face and neck, burning or tingling sensation in the mouth or throat, possibly later diarrhea and vomiting. So in order to serve safe seafood, we are going to buy our seafood from approved reputable suppliers. And then the other thing that we got to make sure we do is protect time and temperature control for these fish whenever we have them in the kitchen. So the cooler has to be actually cool enough, and when we store fresh fish, we store it differently than we store other products in the cooler, because fresh fish needs to be stored colder than other things can be in the cooler. So we'll usually put down some ice in a perforated pan. That's a pan that has a bunch of holes in it, kind of like a colander. You set that over a closed pan, and then we'll put down some like plastic wrap, put down the fillets, put more ice on top, and you can layer it up as deep as the pan is. So you're keeping it colder than the other things that you have in the cooler. Ciguatoxin, this comes particularly from predatory tropical reef fish from the Pacific Ocean, the Western Indian Ocean, and also the Caribbean. So barracuda, grouper, jacks, and snapper are associated with. Again, you have a hot and cold sensation reversals, nausea, vomiting, tingling in the extremities, and then joint and muscle pain. So we purchased these predatory tropical reef fish from approved reputable suppliers. Saxitoxin, it creates an illness called paralytic shellfish poisoning. This comes from shellfish that are found in colder waters, so the Northwest Pacific and the New England coast. The water's a lot colder there than it is down here in the Gulf. So clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops from those areas. You could have this saxitoxin, and if you consume enough of it, you can become paralyzed and you can die from that. So purchase shellfish from approved reputable suppliers. Okay, brevetoxin causes neurotoxic shellfish poisoning. This is from our waters in the Gulf of Mexico, west coast of Florida, in the Caribbean. Clams, mussels, and oysters. Similar symptoms: tingling, numbness of the lips, tongue, and throat, dizziness, hot and cold reversals, vomiting and diarrhea. And again, all of these items need to be purchased from approved reputable suppliers. Domoic acid causes amnesic shellfish poisoning. Again, colder waters, Pacific Northwest and East Coast of Canada. The same shellfish. You can start with vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal pain, but then eventually goes on to confusion, memory loss, disorientation, seizure, and coma. So it can become very serious. Toxic mushrooms. Foodborne illness associated with them is when you eat toxic mushrooms. And that happens when somebody who thinks they know what they're doing takes mushrooms and have natural toxins on them. And that can be prevented by purchasing your mushrooms from approved, reputable suppliers. The mushrooms that you buy in a box like this, those are grown in farms that are usually in caves, somewhere where it's a nice, even temperature, humidity. They can grow bulk, like huge numbers of mushrooms in those conditions. Plant toxins. Again, this happens when plants are purchased from unapproved suppliers. So, I mean, the book doesn't even have examples of what kind of plants are going to cause toxins. This is not a huge source of foodborne illness. You just need to be aware of it. This can happen when certain plants aren't cooked correctly. For instance, if you undercook kidney beans, and I'm assuming that is from the dry state. So if you have dried kidney beans and you're going to cook them, and you don't cook them long enough, this toxin can still be present. So we purchase these from approved, reputable suppliers. Okay, so that's the end of what we're calling chapter 2. Let's see. But there's more information in chapter 2 about allergens. Okay, we're going to start off with physical contaminants. I know we've talked about these a little bit before. Common objects that get into food. It's not easy to see, but in this photograph, there is a little strip of metal that came from opening the can. You have to be careful for things like that, that it doesn't end up on somebody's plate. It can also come from wood or splinters in the operation. Your employee fingernails, staples, bandages, glass, jewelry, and dirt. Naturally occurring objects such as fruit pits and bones. Symptoms, a lot of those things are going to cut you in the mouth or in the throat if you swallow it. So it can cause bleeding and pain. Mild to fatal injuries are possible. Cuts, dental damage, choking. People can choke on a fish bone. So we need to purchase the food from approved, reputable suppliers. Closely inspect our food whenever we receive it, and then take steps to prevent physical contamination, including practice good personal hygiene. And in the next PowerPoint, we're going to be talking about the safe food handler and the things that that person can and cannot do. Okay, chemical contaminants, we talked a little bit about these. Spraying cleaners or sanitizers near food is a really bad idea. Deodorizers, first aid products, health and beauty products, hand lotions, hairspray. You don't want any of that kind of stuff getting into the food products. So if you're using hand lotion, you can't touch food after that. You're going to have to put on gloves. Certain types of kitchenware and equipment, these can leach toxins into the food, especially acidic food. So if you have something made from pewter, copper, zinc, and also types of painted pottery, we don't use those in commercial kitchens because they can leak toxins into the food. Okay, symptoms, it varies on the chemical. Most of these illnesses occur quickly. Vomiting and diarrhea are typical. So if you've been exposed to one of those chemical contaminants, that's what you're going to end up with. If you suspect an illness, call the 911. I don't think we have a separate poison control number in this area. Okay, so to prevent chemicals from contaminating your food, you're going to make sure that we're using chemicals that are approved for your operation, for food service operations. Make sure you're purchasing these chemicals from approved, reputable suppliers. The same folks that sell you like a broad range of products, like a large company like Cisco will also sell cleaning products for restaurants. And there are also lots of other businesses out there that sell cleaning supplies to restaurants. It's important that we store these away from food preparation areas. We don't want them spilling into food or people mistakenly grabbing one thing, thinking it's an ingredient, and adding it to a recipe. We never want to store chemicals above food or food contact surfaces because you just don't want it to drip or fall onto anything that's going to come in contact with food. Use the chemicals for their intended use and follow the manufacturer's instructions. So we have all kinds of sinks. We have hand sinks, we have prep sinks, we have pot washing sinks. We also have mechanical dishwashers. And each one of those has a different type of soap that is used in that area. So you do not want to take dishwashing detergent and put it into the pot sink because the dishwashing detergent can have chemicals that are going to burn your hands. So you don't just do a switch on those kind of things. Only handle food with equipment and utensils approved for food service use. Make sure manufacturer's labels on the original chemical containers are readable. When you take a walk through our kitchens, you'll see a lot of these things are stored under the pot sink area, which you might think is a nice clean area, but it's really not. Lots of things get splashed and spilled in those areas. So we have to be careful that our instructions and labels don't get damaged and become unreadable. Follow manufacturer's directions and your local regulatory requirements when you throw out chemicals. Then we have a group of people out there who would intentionally want to contaminate our food. Could be some type of a terrorist or an activist, somebody who doesn't believe that people should eat animals, disgruntled current or former staff. It could be somebody from your food supplier that doesn't like you or doesn't like who they work for, or it could even be your competitors trying to put you out of business. So the Food and Drug Administration has created a defense tool against deliberate contamination. It's called ALERT, and that stands for these 5 things. Assure Make sure your products are received from safe sources. So that's our approved reputable suppliers again. Look, monitor the security of the ingredients in your facility. So you might have security cameras. You might have people stationed in positions so that they can observe traffic going to and from food storage areas. Your employees, they need to know who is in your facility. I know this is our fourth class. Is there anybody in here today that hasn't been in class before? I don't want you to raise your hand, but I wanted to know if anybody else realized that there was somebody in the class that hadn't been here before. And I know it's not easy with everybody wearing masks. And probably the only reason I know is because that's my job to know. But when you're working in a restaurant, you need to know who is in the facility. If you're the dishwasher, if you're a line cook, if you're the executive chef, you need to know who everybody is and what are they doing in your kitchen. And you need to ask them or tell a manager, there's somebody here that I don't think belongs there. You're going to have written reports. Keep your information related to food defense accessible. And then have a plan to react to a threat. So how are we going to respond if we see suspicious activity or a threat to the operation? And that may be that we're going to call 911. It may be that we have a bouncer or two on hand and we'll call them, or some type of security. Like here at Nichols, we have campus security that's closer than the local police department. But whatever it is, you have a plan. You tell your employees what your plan is, and you make sure that they know that. Okay, so food allergens, and I think I asked on the first day of class how many people have a food allergen. I think there might have been a few. But an allergen is a protein in a food or ingredient to which some people are sensitive. So naturally occurring proteins. And when someone eats enough of an allergen, an allergic reaction can occur. So symptoms of food allergies: nausea, wheezing or shortness of breath, your throat starts to tighten up, your lungs can't hold as much air as they normally could, hives or itchy rashes, swelling in the eyes, the face, the hands or feet, vomiting and or diarrhea, abdominal pain, itchy throat. Okay, with these allergic reactions, they usually happen right away. As soon as that food enters somebody's mouth, they can start having the symptoms of like an itchy tongue, the cheeks can get itchy, and they can become serious very quickly. There's something called anaphylactic shock or anaphylaxis. If that happens, it can lead to death. So you need to call 911 if you have suspected allergic reaction happening in your restaurant. Okay, so there are 8 common food allergens. They account for 90% of the food allergies in the United States. So you're gonna have to know these 8 items. I'm gonna start with milk, soy and soy products. So tofu is a soy product. People can be allergic to eggs or wheat or peanuts. Does everybody know that peanuts grow in the ground? Pardon me? How would you then? Like, they're not really, technically, they're not nuts. Um, and we have tree nuts and such as walnuts and pecans that folks can be allergic to. We have fish, bass, flounder, cod, and crustaceans, crab, lobster, and shrimp. So all 8 of those things, if you're serving them in your restaurant, everybody has to know how to handle these things so that people with allergies don't become affected. You may have heard sesame products are going to be added to the list. What year is it? In 2 years. They've identified it as a major cause of allergens, but they're not requiring labeling yet. But in my mind, as a restaurant owner, you should be aware that this is a big enough concern already. They will not ask you that on the test. It's not included in the textbook yet. It's just my own research. I've seen that. Okay, so what the service staff has to do to prevent allergic reactions. You need to be able to describe the menu items and the preparation that is done to make these items. So they have to know if something is fried in peanut oil, or if there's any of these allergens used anywhere in the dish. Okay. Suggest menu items without the allergen. So the service staff and the kitchen need to kind of work together on this. The kitchen needs to tell the people in the dining room that, you might not expect it, but there's milk in this product, and somebody might be allergic to it. If someone does have an allergy, the server's responsibility is to clearly indicate that on the guest order for the kitchen and service staff, so that everybody knows this exists. Deliver food separately to prevent cross contact. Ideally, this is done by a manager, so that's the only thing that they're taking out is that one plate of food, and they should have communicated with the server to know exactly who it's going to go for, and then they would announce, this is the plate that doesn't have any seafood on it. Okay, so in the kitchen, biggest job for the kitchen staff is to avoid cross contact. Okay, and cross contact is simply the introduction of one allergen into safe food through touching a surface that's contaminated. So we're not going to cook different types of food in the same fryer oil. If we have a fryer for seafood, that's going to be our seafood fryer. If we have one for French fries, that's going to be the one for French fries. And we're going to mix and match. And it may mean, depending on how complicated your menu is, you might have to have several fryers. You might have one that you're frying in peanut oil. And then, of course, you need a whole other set that doesn't have peanut oil. And you want to be very careful you don't put food on surfaces that have touched allergens. So it's almost like raw chicken. You don't want to have anything that's associated with raw chicken touching the food of somebody that has an allergy. Okay. Also in the kitchen, you need to check food labels for allergens. You might be using something um, like a box of chicken stock, and I don't know if that's what this is or not, but at the end of the ingredients list, it lists all of those top 8 allergens if they are present in that item. So you have to know when you're doing this, when you're working in the kitchen, that, wow, who would think that there's wheat in chicken stock? Um, to say something else and I've forgotten it. Okay, so avoiding cross contact, check your recipes and check your ingredient labels. Identify those allergen sources. Make sure you wash, rinse, and sanitize your cookware utensils and equipment in between uses. It doesn't do any good if you're serving pecan crusted catfish that you saute in a pan and you make one order without pecans and you use the same pan to saute it in. So you're still going to have the pecan oils in that pan. Make sure the allergen doesn't touch anything for customers with the food allergies. Wash your hands, change your gloves before you prep the food for somebody with food allergy, or if you're going from working with an allergen to another job. Use separate fryers and cooking oils for guests with food allergies. If you are packaging, like if you have your own house salad dressing or sauces, make sure you identify all the ingredients in there and highlight the allergens that might be present. Okay, so this is the official end of chapter 2. Any questions on allergens, bacteria, viruses, parasites, fungi? Yes. Did I do what? Yeah, I do. It's up on the table over here. You just grab it. Okay, so I know this says chapter 4, but it comes from a different text. This is really the material that's covered in our chapter 3. Okay, so this is the safe food handler and actions that a food handler can do that can contaminate food. Um, Come to work while they have a foodborne illness, have wounds or boils that contain a pathogen, they sneeze or cough in the prep area, around the food, on the equipment. If they have contact with a person who is sick, so if they're taking care of somebody at home that has hepatitis A, um, they could become a carrier and bring that into your operation. They use the restroom and do not wash their hands. Symptoms that we've discussed: diarrhea, vomiting, or jaundice. And again, jaundice is a yellowing of the skin or eyes or nails. So some of the actions, they can contaminate food: scratching the scalp, running your fingers through your hair, wiping or touching your nose, same thing with your ears, touching a pimple or infected wound, wearing a dirty uniform, coughing or sneezing into your hand, spitting in the operation. One of the things that you'll learn as a chef that you have to taste food before you send it out. And it may be that you taste something that is so terrible you want to spit it out. But we don't do that. You can grab a paper towel or something and spit it into the paper towel, but not just a plain out spit aiming for the trash can. Okay, some diseases not transmitted through food. So you might have staff members that have HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, or hepatitis B or C. The Americans with Disabilities Act provides employees with civil rights protections. These employees cannot be fired or transferred because of their disease, because it is not a foodborne disease. Employers must maintain the confidentiality of any staff who have an illness that is not foodborne. So if somebody tells you that they're HIV positive or they have hepatitis B, you can't share that with anyone else in your operation. Okay, so having a good personal hygiene program, managers focus on creating personal hygiene policies. So one of the things that we talked about is employees have to shower or bathe before they come to work. So you have to make sure you tell your employees. So you're going to train these employees on your personal hygiene policies and then retrain them on a regular basis. So typically what you do is you kind of have a list that you go through this training procedure, and then the employee signs off on it that they've been trained and on what date they did that. Managers have to model correct behavior at all times. So if I drop a dinner roll on the floor and I pick it up and say, 2-second roll, it's okay, that's not good. Like, we don't pick food up off the floor and serve it. Managers have to supervise food safety practices. A lot of times it's not going to be possible to stand in the kitchen 24 hours and watch what's going on, but you have to have a series of managers that can go through that process. Revising personal hygiene policies whenever laws or science change. So nothing's coming to mind right now about personal hygiene that has changed in a while. I guess the only thing I can think of is when I was a culinary student, there weren't such a thing as hand sanitizers. But we're going to talk about those in a few minutes. Okay, so where do we wash our hands? Not surprisingly, there's a place called a hand sink. There's lots of different types of sinks in kitchens, but it will be very clear that there are sinks designated just for hand washing. So we don't wash our hands in food preparation sinks or dishwashing sinks or sinks that are used for discarding wastewater. We go to a hand sink to wash our hands. Okay, how do we wash our hands? Okay, this procedure should take at least 20 seconds. And you'll need to know this in order and the times associated with them. So the first thing you do is get your hands and arms wet using warm running water. That water has to be at least 100 degrees. So when you put your hands under it, it shouldn't feel cold. It should feel warm. It doesn't have to be hot where it's uncomfortable, but it has to be warm. And that just helps the soap do what the soap needs to do. So step 2 is apply the soap. Apply enough to build up a good lather. Follow manufacturer's recommendations. They're pretty much the same. You get the soap on your hand, and then you're going to do this next step. Scrub your hands and arms vigorously for 10 to 15 seconds, cleaning fingertips, under fingernails, and between fingers, and usually around your wrists as well. Then we rinse our hands and our arms thoroughly using running warm water. And it's important that we're doing this still at the hand washing sink. We cannot go to the pot sink, stick our hands in the soapy water, rub them, and then stick them in the rinse water. We have to do this all at the hand sink. Dry your hands and arms with a single-use paper towel or a hand dryer. It depends on where you are, what type of hand drying equipment they're going to have. What they don't want you to use is one of those rotating rolls of cloth, or have a hand towel hanging there. They want disposable towels or electric dryer. Okay, some tips to avoid contaminating your hands when you use the restroom. Consider using the paper towel that's available to turn off the faucet and to grab the door handle as you're walking out. When do we wash our hands? Okay, there's a list of things. Before we do food preparation, we have to wash our hands. Before we work with clean equipment and utensils. And every time you're going to put on single-use gloves, you have to wash your hands before you do that. And then there's going to be a whole long list of, you have to wash your hands after. Of course, number 1, you use the restroom, you have to wash your hands. Touching the body or clothing. Coughing, sneezing, blowing nose, using a handkerchief or tissue. You have to wash your hands. Eating, drinking, smoking, chewing gum or tobacco. You have to wash your hands after doing that. Handling soiled items. So if you're handling dirty plates that came back from the dining room, or you're picking up the dirty cleaning cloths in the kitchen to collect them up, you'll have to wash your hands after that. After you handle raw meat, seafood, or poultry, you will always have to wash your hands. After you take out the garbage. Also, after handling service or aquatic animals. So, what's a service animal? Okay, like a seeing eye dog, a companion dog. People are allowed to bring those animals into the restaurant. You're never supposed to play with those dogs or talk to them. They're doing a job. But if you know the people or something and they let you pet the dog, of course you need to wash your hands after doing that. Aquatic animals, if you have like a lobster tank and you're handling lobsters out of there, that's another time you're going to have to wash your hands. If you're handling chemicals that might affect food safety. Anytime you change tasks, before you begin the new task, wash your hands. Anytime you leave and come back to the kitchen or prep area. So even if you walk to the restroom, you wash your hands in there, you come back into the kitchen, you're going to wash your hands again when you get into the kitchen. If you have to handle money, it doesn't matter what the reason is. If you're handling money, you've got to wash your hands. Using electronic devices, so cell phones, tablets, point of sale system. These things are rarely, if ever, cleaned and sanitized. There have been studies where there's more bacteria on your own cell phone than there is on a public toilet seat. Because the public toilet seat gets cleaned a lot more often than your cell phone does. And then the catch-all, touching anything that may contaminate your hands. So if you shake hands with somebody, you're going to have to wash your hands after that. Question? Okay, I heard something. So if we have a case where food handlers have touched food or food contact surfaces with unclean hands, we will have to dispose of that contaminated food. We will have to clean potentially contaminated equipment and utensils, and then retrain and coach food handlers who are not following the correct hand washing procedures, if necessary. Well, if they're not following the correct procedures, then they need retraining. Okay, so we have hand antiseptics now. Liquids or gels that are used to lower the number of pathogens on skin. If you use them, they have to comply with the Code of Federal Regulations and the Food and Drug Administration standards. The only time they should be used is after hand washing. They are not intended to be used in place of hand washing. So if you're going out to do a picnic somewhere, you can't rely on hand antiseptics to keep your hands clean and sanitary. You're going to need a source of warm running water. If you use the hand sanitizers, it should be allowed to dry before you touch food or equipment. Okay, hand care. We keep our fingernails short and clean. We don't wear false nails, and we don't wear fingernail polish. Long nails, all sorts of things can make a home under there, and it can come in contact with the food. The fingernail polish can chip and get into food and become a physical contaminant. Okay, if we have a cut, a wound, a boil, infected, we have it on the hand, any one of them might contain pus. They have to be covered if they are open or draining. How it's covered depends on where exactly it's located. So if it's on your hand, finger, or wrist, cover the wounds with an impermeable cover. That would be a bandage or a finger cot. And this little blue piece is an example of a finger cot. It rolls over your finger just like a balloon would roll over your finger. But there should be a bandage underneath that if you have an open cut. And then you can put a single-use glove over that. If the wound is on your arm, cover them with an impermeable cover, such as a bandage. Impermeable means that water is not going to be able to pass through this bandage. So it has to be of a good quality bandage. Other parts of the body, cover wounds with dry, tight-fitting bandage. Okay. Bare hand contact. We talked some about this. You can never handle ready-to-eat food with bare hands when you primarily serve a high-risk population. So again, those populations would be preschool children, folks in nursing homes or hospitals, and people that have an compromised immune system. So avoid bare hand contact with ready-to-eat food unless the food is an ingredient in a dish that does not contain raw meat, seafood, or poultry and will be cooked to at least 145 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're chopping up onions or celery that's going to be used in, actually we don't use onions, peppers, that you're going to use in a gumbo, you can use your bare hands when you're doing that. If the seafood is an ingredient in a dish that does contain seafood, meat, or poultry, it has to be cooked to its required minimum internal temperature, which for each of those items is going to be 145 or higher. Single-use gloves must never be used in place of hand washing. So we don't take dirty hands and put gloves on and that becomes a cure-all. You have to wash your hands before you put on any new pair of gloves. Single-use gloves should be used when you're handling ready-to-eat food, except when you're washing produce. So if you're washing like case after case of lettuce, you don't have to be wearing gloves to do that. Also, just like with the high-risk folks, if you're putting those ready-to-eat ingredients into a dish that is going to be cooked to the correct internal temperature. What kind of gloves do we use? We use approved gloves for food service operations. They have to be disposable. They're single-use gloves. It's not something that you can wash and reuse. You need multiple sizes because if you went around the room, some people would need like an extra small all the way up to an extra large. It's not uncommon to have people that are allergic to latex. So you need to have an alternative to latex on hand in different sizes. How do we use gloves? Said it plenty of times today, wash your hands before putting on gloves when starting a new task. Select the correct glove size. Hold the gloves by the edge whenever you're putting them on. Once you do have them on, check them for rips or tears. There's all different types of quality of gloves out there, and you might be working somewhere where the gloves rip just when you look at them. Never blow into the gloves. People might be tempted to do this if they've got gloves that are a little bit small for them, but you're contaminating them if you put it up to your mouth. Never roll the gloves to make them easier to put on, like you might do with a balloon. Sometimes you might stretch a balloon or roll it to make it easier to blow up. You can't do that with gloves. And never wash and reuse the gloves, which I think we've said a few times today. When do we change our gloves? As soon as they become dirty or torn. Before you begin a different task. After an interruption, such as taking a phone call. Please take your gloves off before you touch your phone. After you handle raw meat, seafood, or poultry, and before handling ready-to-eat food. after 4 hours of continuous use. So there are some people in some operations that do the same thing all day long. And I can't imagine wearing gloves, the same pair of gloves for 4 hours. But if this person is doing that and they're not dirty or torn, and they're not changing their tasks, then technically they can wear it for a 4-hour shift. Okay, other good personal hygiene practices: make sure that the staff shower or bathe before coming to work. Set up a dress code and make sure the staff follow the dress code. So most places you've got to wear a hat to cover your hair, clean uniforms, whatever type apron the operation wants. Usually you wear check pants and non-skid shoes. Food handlers have to use hair restraints. So you need to get your hair up above your collar and into something like this is a skull cap this guy is wearing. And you can have the paper toques as well. So the food handlers have to have a hat on when they're in the kitchen. Do not wear hair accessories that could become physical contaminants. So something that can pop out of your hair, you don't want to wear that. Don't wear false eyelashes because those could also fall off and contaminate food. Okay, if you have a beard like this guy does, you might be required to wear a facial restraint. If you have a beard or facial hair of any type, and you go into a manufacturing facility, you will have to wear a beard restraint. Clean clothing, wear a clean uniform daily. Don't wear the same uniform day after day without having it washed. Change your soiled uniforms, including aprons when they are soiled. Change into your work clothes at work. There should be a changing room. We've got 3 changing rooms here, just on the left side of the hallway over there. You don't want to be traveling around in your uniform and possibly contaminating it. Store your street clothing and personal belongings in designated areas. We have lockers that y'all can use here for that. I've been fortunate to work in really large places that had locker rooms for us to change, keep our personal clothes in, and then they have a laundry that they took care of our uniforms as well. And then keep dirty clothing away from food and prep areas. Let's see how close we are. Okay, we'll pick up here on Wednesday.